The afternoon hung heavy when the first thick drops began to pelt the roof of the carriage. The sky, once merely cloudy, had transformed into a low, threatening, leaden shroud. The scent of wet earth mingled with the sweat of the horses, who puffed tiredly after hours of travel. The muddy road already showed signs that it would soon become impassable. Inside the carriage, the young traveler, Elena Beaumont, clutched her small leather suitcase tightly in her lap. Her dark, anxious eyes darted from the rain-soaked window to the tense face of the coachman, trying to gauge if there was still time. "Ugh, this is impossible," she exclaimed, letting out a frustrated sigh. "How am I supposed to get to my sister's house on time?" The coachman, a middle-aged man with callous hands and a patient gaze, pulled on the reins, slowing the horses. His voice was deep but calm. "Well, miss, the only solution is to go on foot." Elena's eyes widened as if it were a personal affront. "On foot?" she nearly shouted. "I'll miss her baby shower. I promised I'd be there. I promised." The coachman remained unmoved. He raised an arm and pointed ahead. The road ended abruptly in a desolate scene. The wooden bridge that once connected the two sides of the valley had been destroyed by the raging river below, now roaring like a monster awakened by the storm. Floating logs thrashed violently in the current. Wooden splinters spun through the air, and there wasn't a single plank to risk crossing. "See for yourself, miss," he said, shrugging. "The bridge is gone. There's no way to continue with the carriage." Elena clenched her fists, anger mingling with despair. The strong wind whipped her cloak against her legs, and stray strands of hair stuck to her damp forehead. "No, no, no," she murmured, almost whining. "After all of this." Her sigh seemed to carry the weight of the world. For a moment she closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "Well," she said, her voice trembling, "here's your money." She pulled some coins from the small purse fastened to her wrist and extended her hand firmly, though her fingers trembled slightly. "I'll try to find another way around." The coachman took the coins with a hint of embarrassment. He didn't like abandoning passengers on the road, but there was nothing else he could do. He adjusted his hat, muttered a soft, "Good luck, miss," and with a click of his tongue, turned the horses in the opposite direction. Elena was alone. The carriage slowly disappeared around the bend, taking away the last shred of familiar comfort with it. The sound of hooves echoed along the wet road until it vanished completely, replaced only by the roar of the river and the sharp whistle of the wind. Alone. Elena looked around. The road, now thick with mud, seemed to lead nowhere. The valley was surrounded by dark hills covered with trees thrashing violently in the storm. The cold seeped beneath her cloak, sending shivers across her skin. She took a deep breath and, gathering the courage she had left, began to walk. Her steps sunk into the mud, making progress slow and laborious. Her stomach ached, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning, and above all, one thought gnawed at her constantly. "I'm going to miss my sister's shower. She'll be so disappointed in me." Every clap of thunder seemed to mock her hurry. Night was threatening to fall when Elena realized just how isolated she really was. There wasn't a soul in sight. No farms, no lights, no sign of shelter. Only the endless road, the furious river, and the relentless rain. Fear began to mix with exhaustion, and in silence she whispered to herself, "What do I do now?" But the only answer was the distant echo of thunder. Elena walked aimlessly, trying to shield herself from the rain with the coat that now served only to weigh heavier on her shoulders. Her clothes clung to her body, her shoes sank into the mud, and each clap of thunder made her heart race. She muttered under her breath, remembering the last conversation with the friend before she left. "Take a travel cloak, Elena. You never know when the weather will turn." "Well, I should have listened, shouldn't I?" she grumbled to herself, laughing nervously, as if her own misfortune were a bitter joke. The wind cut across her skin, and night was falling fast. Through the curtain of the storm, a faint light flickered in the distance. It wasn't the cold flash of lightning, but the warm, wavering glow of a lantern. Relief quickened Elena's heartbeat. A house, or at least some kind of shelter. "Well, I hope it's not the house of a witch who makes soup out of travelers," she murmured, trying to lift her spirits with her own humor, though her throat burned from the cold. She crossed the fence, her feet heavy and muddy, and approached the dark wooden door. She hesitated. The silence of the night, mixed with the roar of the storm, seemed even denser here. Summoning courage, she knocked. Knock. Knock. Nothing. No answer. The silence only amplified the sound of water dripping from the roof tiles. Her heart clenched in her chest. It beat again, this time stronger, almost pleading. Just as she was about to give up, the door creaked and a figure appeared in the doorway. A tall man, broad-shouldered and standing firm, illuminated by the lantern he held. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see the serious, wary expression. She, hunched and awkward, suddenly felt small in front of his imposing presence. "Pardon me, sir," she began, stumbling over her words. I got caught in the storm, and I need shelter, just for tonight." "Isn't it a bit late for a woman to be walking alone on these roads?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. "Where is your husband?" The question hit like a stone. Elena straightened up, even though she was shivering from the cold. "I don't have a husband," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I was on my way to visit my sister, but it doesn't matter. I'll find somewhere else." She turned, determined to face the rain again, but behind her, she heard a heavy sigh. "Wait." She stopped. The man seemed to be struggling with his own rules, but finally he opened the door a little wider. "I don't usually take strangers into my home, but I'll make an exception. This time. Just for tonight." Elena exhaled in relief as the man, still hesitant, made room for her to enter. "Oh, thank you so much. I was afraid of sleeping in the rain," she murmured, adjusting her wet skirt and climbing the wooden steps. The interior of the house was simple, yet solid. There were rustic, well-kept furnishings and a subtle scent of damp wood mixed with dried herbs hanging in bundles from the walls. The fireplace, recently extinguished, still held the smell of warm ash. Elena hugged her suitcase to her chest like a shield, carefully observing every detail. The man closed the door behind her with a heavy creak. "Leave your things near the fire," he said, his voice firm, almost commanding. She hesitated, but obeyed, placing the suitcase carefully by the hearth, as if the slightest sound might offend him. His silence seemed to fill every corner of the room, a weight heavier than the thunder outside. Elena felt his gaze fixed on her back and swallowed hard, pressing her lips together. She lowered her eyes and almost inaudibly whispered to herself, "Definitely scarier than a witch." The warmth radiating from the fireplace seemed to touch Elena in every cold corner of her body. The rain still fell outside, beating rhythmically against the roof, but inside the small cabin, the world seemed to slow down. The wind howled through the gaps in the wood, and every crackle from the fire cast shadows dancing across the rustic walls. Elena curled up in the chair, hugging her knees, feeling the heat gradually seeping through the wet fabric of her dress. She studied every detail of the place. The walls were covered in dark wood, marked by time and daily labor. Bundles of dried herbs hung above the fireplace, some yellowed with age, others still giving off a faint scent, a mix of chamomile and thyme. A small wooden cabinet creaked softly whenever the man moved to grab more kindling. Every object reflected a meticulous, calculated, and orderly life. He approached the window, looking out at the storm, his broad shoulders tense beneath the simple shirt. Elena noticed how alone he must be here, yet there was no apparent sadness, only a firm routine, someone accustomed to dealing with the world directly and without artifice. She took a deep breath, trying not to show how fascinated she was by every detail of the place, even as it made her slightly uncomfortable. "I live here alone," he finally said. His deep voice broke the silence that had seemed to stretch for hours. Elena lowered her eyes to the floor, her hands still trembling from the cold. I see," she replied hesitantly, and then added, almost to herself, "I hope you're not the kind of man who cooks travelers in a pot." The man raised his eyebrows slightly, and Elena blushed immediately, realizing her thought had been audible. She glanced at him quickly, but he said nothing, merely returning to stack kindling in the fireplace. As the fire grew, illuminating the room with a golden glow, Elena noticed something that made her catch her breath for a moment. Her eyes, almost involuntarily, examined his profile. The broad shoulders, the strong jawline, the hair slightly tousled by the wind, and the short beard that accentuated the sharp features of his face. She felt an unexpected pang in her chest. He was very handsome, but not in a common way. There was something virile, serious, and mysterious about him that left her restless. "You can come closer if you want," he said, not looking directly at her. "You'll dry faster." Elena hesitated, biting her lower lip, but eventually moved closer, sitting on the edge of the chair nearest the fire. She adjusted her skirt so it wouldn't touch the wet floor and placed her suitcase beside her. Every movement she made seemed observed, and she felt a pang of self-consciousness. "You won't burn yourself sitting near the fire?" he asked, with a slight tone of concern, finally breaking the silence directly. "Oh, no, it's fine," Elena replied, trying to sound natural, though the flushed cheeks betrayed her nervousness. I I just need to dry off a bit." He let out a small sigh, and for a moment, their eyes met. Elena quickly looked away, feeling the warmth rise to her face. "So," he began, his voice softer now, "you were traveling alone in the middle of a storm." "Well," she murmured, almost swallowing the words, "I was going to visit my sister until the storm came and the bridge was gone. I was completely lost." He nodded, as if he understood without needing further explanation. "It's not an easy path, especially on rainy days like this." He paused, now looking at her more attentively, though still reserved. "It's brave to come alone like this." Elena swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. Something about the way he studied her, serious, intense, yet without any malice, made her heart race in a way she hadn't expected. She tried to change the subject. "And do you always live here? This house, has it been yours for a long time?" "Yes, a long time." He turned back to the fire, but the corner of his lips seemed almost like a contained smile. "It's part of who I am, being here, alone, in silence. Elena bit her lip, and the silence returned, but this time it felt less heavy. She felt a mix of curiosity and fascination. His beauty wasn't just physical. There was something in his posture, the quiet confidence, the simple, firm routine that left her curious and, in a way, admiring. "So, you don't feel lonely?" she asked, more on impulse than expecting an answer. He lifted his eyes to her, and for a moment, Elena almost got lost in his dark eyes, deep as the stormy sky itself. "Sometimes, but you learn to tolerate loneliness," he said calmly. "And you? Have you never felt alone in the world?" Elena looked away, contemplating the flames of the fire as she felt the warmth penetrate not only her body, but also her emotions. She couldn't help reflecting on her own life, always so rushed, always trying to meet others' expectations, yet deep down, always alone. The fact that she had never had a husband had never bothered her so much until this moment. Maybe she was just too clumsy, or maybe destined to walk her own path without relying on anyone. The storm outside roared, but inside the cabin, the comfortable silence that had formed between them spoke louder than words could ever. There was curiosity, respect, and something more. A subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable attraction. Elena sighed softly, allowing her body to relax slightly, keeping her eyes fixed on the fire. For the first time since the storm began, she felt that she could breathe, that she could trust, at least for that night, the presence of that mysterious and surprisingly attractive man. The rain continued relentlessly outside, hammering the roof and running through the cracks in the wood. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fireplace made the air dance with shadows, creating a world apart, cut off from the storm raging beyond the walls. Elena sat at the small wooden table, watching the flames reflect in every corner of the space. Dinner was simple: a warm soup served in clay bowls, freshly baked rustic bread, and a bit of cheese. Each item seemed carefully placed, not out of luxury, but out of habit, and attention to what was essential. The scent of bread and soup mingled with the fragrance of wood and dried herbs, and for the first time that day, Elena felt she could relax, even if only a little. The man sat on the other side of the table, his steady hands holding the bowl. He said nothing, only offered her a quick glance, almost as if measuring each of her movements. Elena felt a faint heat rise to her face. There was something in that silent, strong, and secure presence that made her both nervous and curious. "It's hot," she finally said, breaking the silence, her voice low and uncertain, staring at the soup as if it were dangerous. He lifted his eyes briefly, arched an eyebrow, and let out an almost imperceptible smile. "Yes, it'll help warm you." His reply was simple, yet direct, and somehow comforting. She took the spoon and tasted the first sip, feeling the warmth spread through her tired body. Every movement seemed observed, and Elena found herself trying not to spill anything, to straighten her posture, to show some composure. Yet the tension lingered in the air. It wasn't hostility, nor strangeness, but something between curiosity and a silent acknowledgement of the other's presence. As they ate, the rain roared, the fire crackled, and Elena's eyes kept straying toward him. She couldn't ignore the strong lines of his face, the slightly tousled hair, the short but well-kept beard, the firm bearing that made every motion seem deliberate. He was handsome, but in an almost dangerous, intense way that kept her both alert and fascinated. The man, in turn, watched her now and then in silence, as if trying to decipher something in her posture, in her nervous gestures, and in the way she stared at the fire. No words were spoken, but the entire atmosphere seemed charged with meaning, with glances that spoke more than dialogue ever could. Elena drew a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Thank you for letting me stay here tonight," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the crackle of the wood. He gave a slight nod, accepting her gratitude without needing to answer in words. Silence returned, comfortable and intense, each of them absorbing the other's presence without filling the space with forced conversation. She took another spoonful, watching how he focused on his own meal, almost indifferent, yet at the same time aware of her presence. Elena realized she had never been so conscious of every detail of a man. The faint furrow of his brow as he blew on the hot soup, the way his hands held the bowl, the firmness of his gaze when, for an instant, it crossed hers. For a moment, she thought about how strange the situation was. Two near strangers sharing a table in silence, each trying to find comfort in the other's presence, while the world outside disintegrated in storm. And yet, Elena felt something new blooming within her, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something she could almost call attraction. She looked at him again, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. A glimmer in his gaze made her heart leap, and Elena quickly looked away, blushing. Even in the soft darkness, with the fire casting its glow on the walls, there was something between them that needed no words, something revealed only in glances, and the silent tension that grew with every passing second. When they finished eating, she set the bowl aside and sighed. The warmth of the soup still pulsed through her body, and the sense of safety that radiated from him, quiet yet steadfast, made each breath feel easier. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, for the first time that day, Elena felt protected. They didn't speak much more. The dinner had been made of gestures, glances, and silent pauses. And yet, it was precisely this that forged a subtle bond between them, a nonverbal connection that carried both promise and mystery, leaving Elena with the sense that this night would be remembered forever. The silence of the cabin weighed on Elena as she watched the man tend to the fire, his posture firm, almost ritualistic, every gesture measured and precise. The rain continued outside, striking the tiles and running through the cracks, creating a hypnotic rhythm. For a moment, the stillness of the place felt as much a relief as it did a prison. In search of something to occupy her time and calm her nerves, Elena rummaged through her bag and found an old notebook, one she carried but rarely used. Flipping through the pages, a sudden idea struck her. "Have you ever thought about writing down what's happening?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice carried a faint tremor. "Like keeping a record of these days while we're trapped by the storm?" He lifted his eyes to her, suspicious. "A record?" he repeated, firm, his eyebrow arched. "Why would I do that?" "I don't know," she hesitated. "Writing helps to sort out thoughts and maybe to pass the time." After a moment, he let out a short sigh and nodded. "Very well, but don't expect anything sentimental." His voice was steady, though tinged with the hints of restrained humor. Elena opened the notebook to a blank page and handed him the pen. He began writing methodically, describing the storm outside, the state of the cabin, the smallest details of the day's routine. His words were precise, cold, until, almost unconsciously, small confessions began to appear. "The wind reminds me of the sound it made when I was a boy running through the fields. I miss that, though I don't want to admit it." Elena watched his every move, fascinated. The way he held the pen, his focused gaze, the faint furrow of his brow, all of it deepened her quiet interest. She in turn began to write as well, first describing the storm and the warmth of the fire, then feeling she never dared to put on paper. I never imagined the storm could bring me to a place like this, alone yet safe. And strangely, I feel a curiosity I can't explain. Maybe it's the way he observes the world, or maybe I've never stopped to notice the details before. With each page, her confessions grew more intimate. She wrote about the loneliness she carried in her own life, the constant rush that kept her distant from people, the silent fear of never finding someone who could truly understand her. Each line was a small secret, placed before him without him fully realizing what he was reading. "It seems you write with more honesty than you speak," he said at last, without lifting his eyes from the notebook. Elena blushed, smiling faintly, and replied softly, "Sometimes it's easier to admit things to paper than to real people." The man paused, thoughtful, then he too began to write less mechanically. His words emerged almost like whispers. "She looks at everything with such attention, perhaps more than I deserve. It's rare to meet someone who notices such small details. I feel curiosity, perhaps more than I should." Elena caught a glimpse of his words, and warmth flooded her face. A thread of intimacy was weaving itself between them, spun across the pages in unspoken thoughts and hidden confessions shared only through the notebook. Each sentence carried the weight of a silent revelation, and even without words aloud, a delicate dialogue unfolded. Almost without realizing it, she wrote again, "He seems so firm, so steady, and yet there's something human there, something that makes me want to look closer, to understand more. It's strange. I feel a quiet attraction, though I don't know if he notices." He lifted his eyes for a brief moment, catching her gaze as she wrote. A faint smile appeared, barely there, yet enough to make Elena's heart race. Silence returned, now comfortable, but charged with something else. Curiosity, respect, and perhaps a mutual, veiled attraction that existed only within the notebook's pages. The storm continued to roar outside, but within the cabin, among the fire, the warmth, the written words, and the held-back glances, a delicate bond grew, a subtle thread of intimacy that, unspoken, tied the two of them in ways no storm could wash away. Elena sighed softly, setting the pen aside. For the first time that day, she felt safe, curious, and strangely close to the mysterious, captivating man. The improvised diary was no longer just a way to pass the time. It had become a secret space for confessions, a refuge for unspoken feelings, and perhaps the beginning of something unexpected. The crackling of the firewood filled the cabin, keeping pace with the storm outside. Elena still held the notebook in her hands, but this time she felt no urge to write right away. She watched the man as he scribbled in silence, and something in his posture seemed to invite her trust. "May I ask you something?" she said timidly, without taking her eyes off him. He lifted his head, his dark eyes fixed on hers, steady yet serene. "Of course." His voice, firm but calm, was reassuring. Why do you live here alone?" She tried not to sound too curious, but the question escaped straight from her heart. He sighed, resting his elbows on the table and setting the pen aside. For an instant, Elena caught the shadow of pain that crossed his face. "I lost things I should never have lost," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "Friends, family, the life I could have had. Then I realized isolation would be safer, easier." He returned to the page, but each word seemed to weigh heavily. "Losing everything taught me that the presence of others can be a pain I no longer wish to bear." Elena felt her chest tighten. She had never imagined that behind his firmness and serious appearance lay so much vulnerability. She drew a deep breath, then opened the notebook and began to write with trembling hands. All my life I have felt the weight of what was expected of me: marriage, obedience, becoming someone I never wanted to be. I never truly had a choice, and now I feel I risk the same fate, living imprisoned by what the world demands. He looked up at her, surprised. A glimmer of understanding passed through his gaze, and he leaned forward slightly. "I never thought someone could feel that so intensely," he murmured, almost to himself. "And yet you still have the courage to speak of it." "It isn't only courage," Elena answered softly, her voice nearly breaking. "It's necessity. I needed to let it out." She inhaled deeply, caught between a strange sense of relief and fear. For a moment, silence filled the cabin, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a silence heavy with meaning, sharing pain without words, while at the same time allowing a subtle intimacy to form between them. "So then," he began, hesitating, "this diary, it isn't just to record the days, is it? It's to keep from being lost, to let someone, if only on paper, see what you truly feel." Elena nodded, biting her lip. "Yes, to keep from losing myself, and maybe so that someone might understand me without judgment." He closed the notebook carefully, his gaze fixed on her with intensity. "For the first time, someone does." He left the words hanging in the air, heavy and filled with meaning. She looked away, warmth rising to her face, but she couldn't deny the closeness growing between them. For the first time, they had shared their deepest pains without fear of judgment. His isolation, her society's pressure, now intertwined in a space of silent trust. "I never thought a storm could bring this," she said, almost to herself, yet he heard. He smiled faintly, saying nothing, but the gesture was enough. Silence returned, but now it had another texture, laden with understanding, empathy, and a subtle tension neither dared to name. The storm showed no sign of relenting, and the isolation of the cabin turned routine into something almost ritualistic. Elena began helping him with each daily task, gathering firewood, feeding the animals, and cooking. At first, everything was clumsy. Stumbles in the mud, wet hands, nervous laughter. He watched her in silence, yet his eyes missed nothing, from her determination to the small mistakes that made her blush. "Are you sure you know how to use an axe?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he saw her try to split the wood. "Of course, more or less," she replied, looking away with a nervous laugh. "I'd rather not chop off my own hand." He gave a faint smile, almost imperceptible, and stepped closer to show her the proper stance. His fingers brushed against hers as he guided her grip on the handle, and Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. "This way it's easier," he said calmly, without haste, "and safer." "Thank you, Professor," she replied, trying to hide the flush rising to her cheeks. In the stable, while feeding the animals, she spilled part of the grain. He came closer, gathering a few kernels that had fallen, offering his hand to steady her. "It seems you still need practice," he said, his dark eyes glinting with amused curiosity. "And you seem to enjoy teaching me," she retorted, smiling but avoiding his gaze. "Perhaps," he replied with a faint smile, "or perhaps I simply enjoy your company." Elena fell silent for a moment, her heart beating faster. He kept watching her as she finished distributing the feed, undeterred by the color rising in her face. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with something more, a quiet tension both seemed to feel, yet neither dared to name. Later in the kitchen, she tried to prepare the soup, but added too much salt. He approached, taking the spoon gently from her hand, adjusting the seasoning. "Do you need help, or would you rather learn from your mistakes?" he asked, his tone a mix of patience and curiosity. "I'd rather learn from you," she whispered, not realizing the weight of her words. He arched an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Very well. Then pay closer attention next time." The warmth of the fire filled the kitchen, and Elena felt strangely at ease in his presence. Every touch, every gesture was like a silent dance of closeness. He would hand her a cloth when her hands were wet. She sought his approval in the tasks she carried out, and in each lingering glance, something unspoken was understood. While gathering wood together, he leaned in slightly to help her lift a heavy log. Their fingers touched for a moment, longer than necessary, and Elena quickly averted her eyes, blushing. "You're blushing," he said, not mockingly, simply observing. I'm fine," she replied, trying to compose herself, but failing. "You're very much blushing, then," he countered softly, smiling discreetly. "It's nothing I haven't noticed before." She laughed nervously, shaking her head, and they continued their task. Despite the rain and the work, there was something light in the air, a quiet intimacy that grew with each shared gesture. At the end of the day, when they finally sat by the fire, exhausted, he adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, a simple gesture, yet full of care. She didn't protest, letting the closeness remain, feeling a strange blend of comfort and fascination. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I never imagined sharing chores could be so pleasant." "Neither did I," Elena replied, looking at him, trying not to reveal how deeply the simple sound of his voice affected her. Their eyes met, and for a moment the outside world, the storm, everything else faded away. The intimacy born of days spent in shared routine was subtle yet profound, and both of them knew that this newfound bond carried a silent promise, a romantic tension that needed no name. The storm roared fiercely outside, and the cabin seemed to shrink under the weight of the rain and wind. Alina sat closer to the fireplace, feeling the warmth of the flames soothe not only her body, but also her weary mind. He remained standing, staring into the fire, his broad shoulders tense, his gaze distant. "The storm feels like it will never end," Elena murmured, trying to fill the heavy silence. "Sometimes it's better if it doesn't," he replied, his voice firm, yet carrying an almost introspective tone. "It forces us to be still, to notice what truly matters." She turned her eyes to the fire, sensing his closeness without daring to look at him directly. "And what truly matters to you?" she asked hesitantly, almost in a whisper. He stepped closer, stopping just a few paces away, and replied softly, "What I can't have, what I've lost, maybe even people who should never have left." Alina felt the weight of his words and, without knowing why, let out a restrained sigh. "I feel that too. Sometimes I feel trapped by expectations I never chose, by roles I don't want to play, and no one understands." He stopped, his eyes finally fixed on hers. For the first time that night, the tension became almost tangible, visible in the restrained gestures, in the heavy air between them. No one really understands. It's hard to share. Alina swallowed hard, her heart beating faster. "I know, but maybe we can understand each other?" she said quietly, without lifting her eyes. "Just for tonight, at least." He stepped closer, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. His hand nearly brushed hers, hesitated, and drew back only a few inches. The unspoken gesture said more than any words could. Alina, he began, his voice rough, almost uncertain. I... forget it. She quickly turned her eyes away, her heart racing. What had he meant to say? Alina couldn't find the words to answer. The rain was beginning to ease, with scattered drops still falling on the roof, as if the storm were giving its final sighs. Elena sat close to the fireplace, the notebook open on her lap. On the pages, her words were gradually moving away from the cold record of the storm, filling instead with thoughts of them, of him, of her, of what might exist between them. He approached, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her write in silence. "You write as if speaking to someone who already knows everything," he said, his voice low, almost hoarse. Elena lifted her gaze, blushing, but with a restrained smile. "Perhaps I'm writing to you," she replied, her tone light, yet heavy with meaning. He arched an eyebrow, amused, and stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. "And what if it's only a temporary refuge," he asked, serious, brow furrowed, "and not something meant to last?" She sighed, biting her lip, answering sincerely. "And what if it's something more?" she murmured. "Something that doesn't need words to exist." Silence fell between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was charged with expectation. He leaned slightly, as if wanting to get even closer, yet kept the gesture contained, respectful. Elena felt the warmth of his breath, the proximity of his broad, solid shoulders. "So you think there could be something beyond this storm?" he asked, softly, without looking away. "I don't know," she replied, with a shy smile. "But I want to believe there is." He moved even closer and, for a moment, almost touched her hand, hesitating. "Elena," he said, almost in a whisper, "was it only the storm that brought us here, or do you feel something?" She lifted her eyes to meet his, holding his gaze without looking away. "I feel it," she said, softly yet firmly. "I don't know exactly what, but something." He leaned slightly, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with the unspoken. No touch came, but the closeness was enough for both to feel the growing bond. "Perhaps," he said, finally, with a faint smile, "we can discover together what this means." Elena closed the notebook, tucking away the words that spoke of her hidden confessions, shared pains, and restrained desire. A gentle weight of expectation lingered in the air, but alongside it came a sense of lightness, as if for the first time she could breathe freely even in the face of uncertainty. They remained there, face to face, eyes meeting, the silence now full of meaning, heavy with unspoken promises, and a romantic tension that needed no name. Outside, the rain gradually lessened, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and the promise of a new day. Inside the cabin, by the warmth of the fire and in their silent intimacy, Elena and he knew that something had shifted between them. Something that was more than just a refuge, something that might someday become something more, even without a word to define it. The sun was rising on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the earth soaked by the storm. Elena finished packing her things, each movement careful, as if trying to delay her departure without admitting it to herself. The cabin, which had sheltered her for days and made her feel something she couldn't name, now seemed smaller, yet somehow more alive. He was leaning against the door, arms crossed, watching her in silence. There were no words, only the gentle tension that had been building since her arrival. "Thank you for everything," she said, pausing, unsure of what to say, "for your hospitality and for the shelter." He nodded, his dark eyes following her every movement. "No need to thank me. And the notebook?" He gestured toward the journal on the table, still open to her last pages. "You can keep it then," she said with a small smile. "To remember these nights, or perhaps to continue writing, if you want." He lifted his gaze, surprised, and then a small, discreet smile curved his lips. "Perhaps I will continue. Perhaps I need to." There was a pause, and for a moment nothing needed to be said. The air carried more than words could express. Days of shared silence, hidden confessions, lingering glances, and restrained gestures. A bond that no one had dared to name now hovered between them, firm and delicate at the same time. "Elena," he said finally, as if testing the sound of his own voice, "take care and be happy." She looked at him, her breath light, feeling her heart race, and simply said, "You too." The formal farewell became necessary, and even without touch, without a promise, there was something profound in the way they looked at each other. Every gesture carried meaning. Every shared breath in those last seconds spoke of complicity, respect, and restrained desire. She stepped out of the cabin, the door closing slowly behind her. He remained there, watching her walk along the wet path, his eyes following each step. The sun now lit the sky, clearing the heavy storm clouds, and the fresh scent of wet earth hung in the air. When he turned back to return to the cabin, his eyes fell on the journal on the table. The pages, filled with words, smiles, and confessions, remained there, silent witnesses to everything they had experienced together: the fear, the pain, the hope, and the subtle attraction that never needed to be spoken. And despite the formal farewell, there was something in their gazes that said far more than any promise could hold. An invisible bond, delicate and intense, that would endure the distance, the life beyond, and the passage of time. A bond that perhaps could bloom again when their paths crossed once more. The open skies signaled not only the end of the storm, but also the possibility of something new. Something without a name yet, but which both felt growing, quiet and certain, like the warmth of the sun now illuminating the road ahead. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. Want to see the continuation of this story? Comment below and let us know what you think. Your opinion makes all the difference.